Good evening. I'd like to share my research from American Christian Heritage course at Liberty University on the person of L. Nelson Bell, Lemuel Nelson Bell, July 30th, 1894 through August 2nd, 1973, was born to James Harvey and Ruth Lee McHugh Bell in Longdale, Virginia. The family eventually moved to Waynesboro, Virginia. The 20th century, or the Christian era, was a century of diversity of religions. L. Nelson Bell lived most of his life during this time and so took advantage of the opportunity to address the ever changing theology of the church. Bell addressed social and political topics, voicing a conservative stand for abortion, capital punishment, civil rights, and public education. This research will help the Christian to clarify a pertinent perspective regarding the church and the responsibility of Christians in America. His faith. Bell's family was a devout Christian family with a warm, genuine faith and belonged to the Presbyterian Church. His father was an elder and his mother taught Sunday school for children. Nelson committed his life to Christ in 1906 during an evangelistic service at the First Presbyterian Church. He continued his devotion to Sunday services and the boys' club at church throughout high school. It wasn't until college at Washington and Lee College in 1911 that his faith became active in the Volunteers' Morning Watch as he took on the responsibility of devotions for his fraternity brothers. He taught Sunday school at Grace Presbyterian Church, helped at a colored mission in the afternoon, and sang choir in the evening. The Lord was preparing Bell for the future. After graduation and a wedding, Bell and Virginia began a habit which they continued all of their lives: family prayers, morning and evening. Bell was the godly leader of his family. He was a devoted husband and father, and he placed a high priority on family. Bell and Virginia ate dinner together with their children and spent evenings as a family, even with their busy schedule with the mission. Sundays were a special time of celebrating the Sabbath, singing around the piano, and spending time talking about the Lord and the church. Bell's fidelity to Christ and his service was evident to his children, along with his strong belief in the authority of the Bible. The Bell children were educated at home by Virginia until 1932. Rosa and then Ruth went on to a Christian school in Western Korea, and Rosa, Ruth, and Clayton attended Wheaton College in the States. Rosa, who wanted to become a doctor like her father, contracted TB and had to leave college, then met and married and taught Bible studies faithfully at her church until the age of 93. She died in 2011. Ruth, of course, married to Billy Graham, served her family in the ministry until her death in 2007. Virginia was a graduate of Johns Hopkins University School of Nursing and went on with her husband to be missionaries in Korea in 1953. She died in 2006. And Benjamin Clayton was a Presbyterian minister in Texas who died in 2000. Bell recalled the very instant he knew that God wanted him to be more than just a lawyer and layman who would financially support missions. It was December 1911 when he would answer the call to medical missions through the support of SPM. Much of the mission at Love and Mercy Hospital when they arrived in 1916 was spent doctoring victims of bandit violence as well as the bandits themselves. Bell published several successful surgeries in medical journals. He had some work with elephantitis. He did a lot of work on people's eyes and ears, and along with everyday surgery. They say he did more surgery before lunchtime than most American doctors did the whole week. But it was evident that the gospel was a priority in Bell's everyday life. The gospel and his love of God intertwined with his work within the prison, training Chinese doctors for the mission, raising support and funding for new hospitals, along with the work of recruiting other American doctors. Bell was known for his overwhelming concern for the spiritual condition of his patients' souls. Ruth remembered her father as committed and zealous, yet always happy and full of banter and humor. The Bells departed in May 1941. They had served China for 25 years, and the threat of World War and Pearl Harbor finally sent them back to the United States. Bell was involved in world missions as well as mission of the church and local missions. He served the PCUS Board of World Missions from 1948 to 1996. He encouraged missionary workers and not only to Presbyterian works in Brazil and Korea, but also to a number of countries in Africa, Europe, and Palestine. Bell's commitment to Christ gave him a global vision that made him a missionary to the world. Back home in North Carolina, he became involved in the mission of Montreat Anderson College, his work at his own Asheville Presbytery, where he was a layman and occasionally preached, Columbia Theological Seminary, and some activist groups like Concerned Presbyterians and International Christian Churches Council. Bell believed there were social and political enemies of the church: global communism, racial integration, and moral license. Bell believed the only remedy for these enemies was spiritual awakening and revival, and spirit-filled evangelists who would turn back to God and place her in the midst of worldwide evangelization. Bell discussed communism in one of the essays in While Men Slept. He stated that wherever communism falls, the church and Christians will be attacked. Sadly, he recounted the 8,000 Protestant missionaries and the 275 Christian hospitals in China, which had all but disappeared in 1970. In numerous articles, Bell laid out a case he considered racial moderation. No one should force integration. At the same time, within the boundaries of a segregated society, individuals should be treated equally before the law, and violence should be eschewed. And in moral license, specifically to young people, Bell blamed the parents, the church, and the culture for the gross moral laxity and spiritual blindness of the youth, stating that they were victims of neglect, indifference, and false values. In his essay, The Predicament of Youth, Bell encouraged that prayer, knowing and studying the scriptures, and reaching young people where they are with the gospel would be the remedy, not with humanitarian youth programs. We know that he was a conservative Presbyterian and a fundamentalist. When he returned from China, he created the Southern Presbyterian Journal with a little help from his friends to defend orthodoxy in the PCUS. That ran from 1942 to September of 1959. He was the editor at that time. It's important to note that Bell was sounding the alarm for the Presbyterian Church, yet it could have been true of the many new and declining denominations of that century, and unfortunately still true of the church today. He addressed social and political topics. He voiced a conservative stand for abortion, civil rights, capital punishment, and public education, those same issues that we should be voicing a conservative stand for today, in my opinion. Christianity Today. Billy Graham shared this idea with his father-in-law, who had the administrative talent to help launch the magazine in 1956. He served as the new journal's unnamed publisher and as its first executive. In later years, he also wrote its most popular feature article, The Layman and His Faith. CT was an influential journal which shaped evangelicalism through a network of leadership, primarily to equip the clergy and lay leaders and to win liberals to the evangelical position. One of Nelson Bell's most significant contributions for CT was to cultivate Sun Oil Company's J. Howard Pugh as the magazine's major benefactor. Both this SPJ and CT provide insight of L. Nelson Bell's conservative Christianity during this time of theological liberalism, as well as cited other differences perused between liberals and conservatives in the 20th century. It was the ethical response to social responsibility and concern for public values, both political and non-political. And Sean Lucas, in one of the articles, points to the perseverance of Bell. Even when the Presbyterian Church was crumbling, he was elected the moderator of the General Assembly in 1972, and he used his time as moderator to seek peace in his denomination. Now we know his daughter Ruth married Billy Graham. He's probably most well known as being Billy Graham's father-in-law. And some of his most thrilling times were the international crusades, especially the 1954 Herringway Crusade in London, when 36,000 decision cards were completed. Through his role on the board of directors of the BGEA, Bell played a role in developing the 1966 World Congress of Evangelism in West Berlin, Germany. He also ran public interference for Billy among critics, especially those more conservative like Bob Jones, who accused Billy Graham of peddling a discount type of religion and sacrificing the cause of evangelism on the altar of temporary convenience. Bell could persuasively rebuke those opponents because of his own reputation for theological conservatism. Spicier in tone than Billy and possessed of insistent theological precision, which he exercised in debates within his own church council, Bell allowed Billy to keep his distance from denominational politics while maintaining clear evangelical commitments. Bell would keep an eye on Graham's health and also often replied to letters for Graham. There's a lot of controversies during this century, not just within the Presbyterian Church, but all denominations. But I just wanted to pull a few of these in that Bell was passionate about. One of them, the National Council of Churches, when it was formed in 1950, but actually began more than a half a century before that when it was in the works. It emerged and conservatives formally withdrew, and Bell consistently opposed it in the SPJ, stating the NCC was causing confusion and resentment by constantly meddling in economic, social, and racial matters and could not be trusted. In 1954, the PCUS endorses desegregation. They were the first church to endorse the Supreme Court of the United States ruling against racial segregation. The PCUS still retained Black Presbyterians within its boundaries, and Bell stated in an editorial, "We believe it is a mistake because we believe the progress and development of a Black-only church in the South would be greatly advanced by a separate church. The racial position of the SPJ was largely cultural and also believed that the Bible defended segregation. The greatest threat was social intermingling and, of course, intermarriage, and sought to discredit the liberal position on race." The General Assembly in 1962 had a report of the special committee, which called for a secular state. And this was the argument of church and state, in which Bell believed confused freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, and believed it would create a totally secular state, stripping all evidence of either Christian heritage or belief. The report also recommended several ideas that are a reality today, like the elimination of the Bible from public schools, the absence of Christian character among those seeking public office, as well as specific concerns regarding the family, divorce, and adoption. I think it's important to note that Bell had several books and one biography written about him, and I read these and derived a lot of research from these sources. In Convictions to Live By, 1966, L. Nelson Bell writes this book as an expression of faith and pairs it with his belief that man must have convictions about God, Christ, the Bible, salvation, and himself. This resource provided yet another example of authentic Christianity lived out in every facet of Bell's life: personal, mission, physician, and community. Though there are many who exhibit this type of faith, Bell's humble character, as emphasized by Christ, is woven throughout this book. He is admittedly, he said this often, a simple, plain man, a sinner saved by grace, always giving glory to God for his goodness. While men slept is a reference to the parable of the Gospel of Matthew 13. It is important to note that when Bell returned from China, he found the Presbyterian Church in a state of confusion, and so it is evidenced in this collection, some 50 years later, that the message remains the same. While men slept, the enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And Pollock wrote A Foreign Devil in China at the request of Billy Graham, defining the way that Chinese referred to people from other countries, though Nelson Bell had acquired quite a different name during the many years he spent there as a missionary. He was actually a lover of the Chinese people. He writes a first-hand account of Bell's work within the hospitals and prisons, training Chinese doctors for mission, raising support and building new hospitals, as well as the work of recruiting other American doctors to come, all for the sake of the gospel. It's important that we leave a legacy, and that is obvious in L. Nelson Bell's lifetime. Again, Sean Lucas states that he was a major influence on the Christian faith. He represented the thoughts, hopes, and aspirations of new evangelicalism of the mid-20th century. Ruth Bell moved to Montreat across the street from her parents and ensured that her children grew up surrounded not only by loving grandparents, but also Presbyterian clergy and missionary families. Because Billy Graham was gone a lot, his father was there, her father was there, and all 5 grandchildren were embedded in networks of Christian connection and Presbyterian purposefulness. The children imbibed their grandparents' worldview, shaped as it was by decades of mission, evangelism, and service. Ruth Graham's choice to raise their children under her father's influence displayed its fruit. It can be seen today in Franklin Graham's mission with Samaritan's Purse, which is worldwide global mission. And also Will Graham returned to China to preach the gospel in 2015. And I quote, "My grandfather spent years sowing seeds of gospel in China, and I continue the work began nearly 100 years ago. I pray that it would bear amazing fruit." A family inheritance which demonstrates how private connections can have public effects. And we know that children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Nelson Bell continue to preach the gospel and share the love of Christ with the world. I'm going to leave you with this quote. Despite his lack of formal theological training, L. Nelson Bell's biblical worldview, unwavering character, and his influence on Christian evangelicalism provided hope and assurance for others then, and is a great encouragement for the Christian in the 21st century to lead a virtuous and disciplined Christian life. Only those who are prepared to die are really prepared to live. How profound. Dr. L. Nelson Bell. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I enjoyed the course. God bless you.